2 years ago, the man I was planning my wedding with looked at me across a dinner table, his face twisted in a sneer, and told me that my appetite, my body, my very being, was disgust. The man who just left a 2-minute, tear-filled, rambling voicemail on my phone, begging me for the chance to just hear my voice again. That's him. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ava. I'm 27 years old, and I am the proud owner and head chef of a restaurant that just earned its first major culinary award. But before I was a chef, before I was a business owner, I was a girl who made the mistake of believing that a man's love could be the foundation of my own self-worth. The story I'm about to tell you is ugly. There's no other word for it. It's a story I've kept locked in a vault, because the word he used to describe me, disgusting, it wasn't just an insult. It was a verdict. It was a branding iron that seared itself onto my soul. It's one thing to be called fat by strangers or bullies. It's another thing entirely to have the person who sleeps in your bed, the person who has seen every vulnerable part of you, look at you with revulsion. It makes you feel like you are not just flawed, but fundamentally rotten from the inside out. For a very long time I believed him. Oh my gosh, I believed him with every fiber of my being. His disgust became my own. I looked in the mirror and saw only what he saw. A disgusting, undisciplined woman who didn't deserve happiness, who certainly didn't deserve love. That feeling, it's a cancer. It metastasizes, spreading from your reflection to your career, to your friendships, to your dreams, until your entire life feels like a contaminated zone. You start to ask yourself the most poisonous questions. Just because I'm fat, am I disgusting? Do I deserve to have the person I love look at me with contempt? Is my body a crime that I am constantly committing against him? And in the suffocating silence of your heartbreak, the answer you hear is a resounding yes. But this is not a story about how I was broken. This is a story about what I cooked up from the ashes. It's about the moment I realized that his disgust was a reflection of his own empty soul, not my beautiful, bountiful body. It's about how I took my greatest source of shame, my love for food, and transformed it into my greatest source of power. This is the story of how I stopped trying to starve myself to be worthy of his love, and started feeding my own soul to become a woman who no longer needed it. The journey was 2 years of fire, both literal and metaphorical. It was 2 years of burns, cuts, and exhausting 18-hour days. It was a path of rediscovery, of pushing my body and my spirit to their absolute limits. There were countless nights I would collapse into bed, smelling of garlic and onions and failure, and I would want to give up. But the fire in my belly, the one he tried to extinguish with his contempt, was now a professional-grade, 6-burner stove, and it was burning hotter than ever. I know this story is painfully specific, but I also know the feeling is universal. The feeling of being judged by someone who is supposed to love you unconditionally. The feeling of having your body, your appetite, your very essence, treated as a problem that needs to be solved. If you have ever felt that, I see you. I am telling this story for you. Before we go back in time, to the 5-star illusion my life used to be, I need to ask you for a small taste of your support. If this story is already stirring something in you, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It's a small click that creates a huge wave of encouragement, giving me the strength to serve up this raw, painful, and ultimately delicious story of my counterattack. Alright, preheat the oven. Let's go back to a girl who was about to learn that the love of her life had a very bitter aftertaste. 2 years before my world was filleted and served cold, I was living in what I genuinely believed was a perfect life. I had a perfectly fine job in marketing, a job that was creative enough to be interesting but safe enough to be stable. It paid for my perfectly charming apartment, a place I had filled with plants, overflowing bookshelves, and the constant comforting scent of something simmering on the stove. And I had the perfectly charming fiancé, Liam. Liam was the kind of man you build dreams around. He was a golden boy, handsome, successful in finance, from a family with a good name and a big house in the suburbs. We met at a food festival, a detail that, in hindsight, is drenched in a thick, tragic irony. I was there with friends, geeking out over artisanal cheeses, and he approached me, not with a cheesy pickup line, but with a genuine question about the tasting notes of the aged Gouda I was sampling. We spent the rest of the day wandering from stall to stall, sharing small plates, laughing and talking. He seemed to love my passion for food, my uninhibited joy in a perfectly crafted bite. He didn't seem to see a fat girl, he saw a connoisseur. Our relationship was built around this shared Epicurean joy. He was my willing taste tester, my sous chef, my biggest culinary fan. Our weekends were adventures in flavor. We'd spend Saturdays at the farmer's market, my favorite place on earth, and he'd patiently hold the bags as I chatted with the vendors. Our evenings were spent in our kitchen, a bottle of wine open, music playing, as we'd cook elaborate meals together. "You're a magician, Ava," he'd say, stealing a piece of roasted vegetable from the cutting board. He celebrated my appetite. He celebrated the body that my love of food had created. He'd wrap his arms around my soft waist from behind and whisper, "I love that there's more of you to hold." I didn't just believe him. I built my entire sense of self-worth on the foundation of his acceptance. The reason for my weight was simple. I love food. I love to cook it, to eat it, to share it. My family is a loud, loving Italian family, where food is the fifth love language. Growing up, the kitchen was the heart of the home, a place of warmth and abundance. Being thin was never a priority, being well-fed was. And in Liam, I thought I had found a partner who understood and shared that value. Our shared life was a constant, delicious feast, and the happy weight I carried was, to me, a physical manifestation of our contentment. I was so blissfully happy, so utterly secure in his love, that I never saw the cracks forming in the foundation. Now, I need to introduce a key character, my unwitting supporter. He wasn't a close friend or a family member. He was a grumpy 70-year-old French chef named Antoine, who ran a small cluttered produce stall at the farmer's market. He was a legend, a man who had owned a Michelin-starred restaurant in his youth, before retiring to grow the most exquisite heirloom vegetables imaginable. He was notoriously curmudgeonly and suffered no fools. Most people were intimidated by him, but I was fascinated. I would stand at his stall, not just buying his produce, but asking him questions. "Chef," I'd say, "what's the best way to bring out the sweetness in these baby carrots? Or if I'm making a puree, should I use the purple or the white cauliflower?" He would grunt, look me up and down with his piercing blue eyes, and then, seeing the genuine passion in my face, he would soften. "The purple," he'd grumble. "It has a nuttier, more complex flavor. But you must not overcook it. You treat it with respect." He never once complimented my cooking, but he would occasionally give me a nod of approval that felt more valuable than a trophy. "You have a good palate, girl," he said to me once, after I correctly identified a faint note of anise in his fennel frond. "You don't just eat, you understand." He never, ever commented on my body. He didn't see a fat girl. He saw a palate. He saw a fellow food lover, someone who understood that ingredients had a soul. His quiet professional respect was a seed being planted in my subconscious, a seed of a future I couldn't yet imagine. The first sign of trouble in paradise, the first hint of a bitter note in my sweet life with Liam, came in the form of his mother, Catherine. She was a woman who was as polished, elegant, and devoid of warmth as her all-white living room. She tolerated me with a kind of strained, polite smile, but I always felt like a clumsy, oversized bull in her minimalist china shop. Liam and I announced our engagement at his parents' anniversary party. Catherine hugged me, her grip surprisingly tight, and whispered in my ear, "We are so thrilled, dear. And a wedding is such a wonderful motivation to get in shape. A bride should be her most beautiful self on her big day." The comment, delivered with a smile, was a perfectly aimed poison dart. Motivation, get in shape. She was telling me in the kindest, cruelest way possible that I wasn't good enough as I was. I looked at Liam, hoping he would rush to my defense, but he just smiled and wrapped his arm around me. "Don't worry, Mom," he said brightly. "We've got a whole year to turn Ava into a supermodel." He laughed. He thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. It was a promise he fully intended to keep. From that day forward, our joyful, food-filled life began to change. The shared joy of cooking was slowly replaced by the solitary tyranny of calorie counting. Liam started buying healthy cookbooks. He'd suggest we go for a hike instead of trying the new pasta place. Our kitchen, once my creative sanctuary, started to feel like a laboratory for low-fat, joyless experiment. His praise, once focused on the flavor of my food, now shifted to the healthiness of it. "This is great, Ava," he'd say, picking at a quinoa salad. "So good for you." I tried to be on board. I loved him. I wanted to be the perfect bride for him. So I tried to shrink myself. I tried to curb my appetite, to ignore the cravings that were so intertwined with my own sense of joy and comfort. I started to see food not as my friend, but as my enemy. And every meal became a battle, a test of my discipline, a test of my worthiness for his love. I was starving myself, not just of food, but of the very passion that made me who I was. And I was doing it all for a man who, as I was about to find out, would never, ever be satisfied. The year of our engagement was a masterclass in the art of slow-motion self-erasure. I was engaged in a quiet, lonely war against my own nature, and I was losing. My love for food, the very thing that had brought Liam and me together, had been reframed as my greatest character flaw. Our kitchen, once a stage for joyful creation, became a courtroom where every meal was evidence for or against me. Liam appointed himself my head coach, my nutritionist, and my warden. It was all framed in the language of love and support. "I'm doing this for us," he'd say, as he'd replace the butter with a low-fat spread that tasted like plastic. "I just want you to be healthy and confident on our wedding day." But his support felt like a constant, humming judgment. He'd watch me eat, his eyes subtly tracking every bite. If I took a second helping of roasted potatoes, his smile would tighten. If I skipped dessert, he'd reward me with a warm, approving kiss that made me feel both cherished and utterly pathetic. My body became a public project. When we were with his friends, he'd make a big show of ordering the healthiest things on the menu for us to share. "Ava and I are on a pre-wedding health kick," he'd announce proudly, as if my body were a joint venture we were preparing for an IPO. His friends, all paired off with effortlessly thin women, would nod with the kind of condescending approval that made my skin crawl. They saw a great guy, a supportive fiancé, helping his fat fiancé get in shape for the big day. They didn't see a woman who was slowly starving, not just for food, but for a single, unconditional sign of love. The weight came off, in painful, grudging increments. 10 pounds, then 15. But the joy in my life was disappearing at a much faster rate. My clothes were looser, but my spirit felt like it was trapped in a straitjacket. I stopped aching. I stopped visiting the farmer's market because the sight of all that beautiful forbidden produce was too painful. I stopped seeing Chef Antoine, his gruff, respectful voice a painful reminder of a passion I was being forced to abandon. The magician, as Liam had once called me, was disappearing. The final catastrophic act of our relationship took place 2 months before the wedding. It was Liam's 30th birthday, and he wanted to celebrate with a small, elegant dinner party at our apartment. "This is your chance to shine, Ava," he said, his eyes gleaming. "But you know, a healthy but impressive menu. To show everyone how far we've come." It was a test. I knew it. A final exam. Could I be both the talented chef he had fallen for and the disciplined, thin woman he was trying to create? Desperate to pass, to finally earn his unqualified approval, I threw myself into it. I spent weeks, planning a menu that was a masterpiece of culinary deception. Everything was low-calorie, low-fat, gluten-free, but disguised as decadent, gourmet cuisine. I made zucchini noodles with a lean turkey bolognese, cauliflower crust pizza with fat-free mozzarella, and for dessert, a black bean brownie that tasted vaguely of regret. I cooked for 3 days straight, my old passion flickering to life, but this time it was fueled by a desperate, gnawing anxiety instead of joy. The night of the party, our apartment was filled with Liam's friends and a few of his senior colleagues from the bank. It was a room full of sharp suits, expensive watches, and thin, beautiful women in silk blouses. I played the role of the perfect hostess, smiling and refilling wine glasses, my own stomach empty and rumbling because I was too terrified to eat in front of them. The food was a hit. Everyone raved. "Liam, you're so lucky," one of his colleagues gushed. "A fiancé who is beautiful and can cook like this? You've hit the jackpot." Liam beamed, soaking in the praise. He put his arm around my waist, pulling me in for a public, performative squeeze. "I know, right?" he said. "And the best part is, it's all healthy. My Ava has become so disciplined." He looked down at me, and in his eyes, I saw it. The look I had been starving for. Pure, unadulterated pride. In that moment, I thought I had won. I thought I had finally done it. The night wore on. The guests were drinking more, the conversation getting louder. I was clearing the dessert plates when I overheard a conversation between Liam and his boss, a powerful, intimidating man named Mr. Davenport. They were standing by the balcony door, cigars in hand. "She's a wonderful hostess, Liam," Mr. Davenport said, gesturing towards me with his cigar. "A real asset. A man in your position needs a wife who can run a household like this." "Thank you, sir," Liam said, his voice puffed up with pride. "She's come a long way. It's been a project, but we're getting there." A project. The word hit me like a physical slap. He said it so casually, so thoughtlessly. I wasn't his partner. I was a renovation. A fixer-upper he was proud of improving. Then Mr. Davenport laughed, a low, rumbling sound. "Well, she's certainly got a healthy appetite for life, eh? Good to see a woman who isn't afraid to eat." It wasn't a malicious comment. He was an older man from a different generation. He probably meant it as a compliment. But I saw Liam's body stiffen. I saw his smile freeze on his face. This was not part of the carefully curated image he had been projecting all night. "Oh no, that's just for show," Liam said quickly, his voice a little too loud, a little too jovial. "She's actually incredibly strict. She barely eats a thing. It's all smoke and mirrors." He was trying to recover, to spin it, to protect his investment. But then came the final fatal moment. I had just finished loading the dishwasher. The party was winding down. I hadn't eaten a single bite of the food I had spent 3 days preparing. I was dizzy with hunger. I thought no one was looking. I went to the platter of leftover charcuterie, my one real unplanned indulgence for the party. There was one piece of prosciutto-wrapped melon left. My favorite. My mouth watering. I picked it up and popped it into my mouth. It was a single bite. A stolen moment of pure, unadulterated pleasure. The saltiness of the cured meat, the sweetness of the ripe melon. It was heaven. And then I looked up. And I saw him. Liam was standing across the room, by the bookshelf, watching me. And the look on his face, it was not disappointment. It was not frustration. It was pure, undiluted disgust. His face was a mask of sheer revulsion, as if he had just watched me eat a live insect. His upper lip was curled back from his teeth in an involuntary sneer. His eyes, the eyes I had loved, were filled with a contempt so profound it was like looking into the abyss. He had seen me. He had seen my appetite. He had seen the real hungry me slip out from behind the mask of the disciplined, good fiancé. And he was disgusted. The perfect, sweet bite of melon turned to ash in my mouth. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was as if a spotlight had suddenly snapped on, illuminating me in all my shameful, hungry glory. The entire party, the entire world, seemed to fade away. There was only the look on his face, a look that was branding itself onto my brain. He didn't say a word. He just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a gesture of pure, final dismissal. Then he turned back to his conversation, as if nothing had happened. But I had seen it, and I could never unsee it. The rest of the night was a blur. I moved through the motions of saying goodbye to the guests, of cleaning up the debris of the party, in a state of profound shock. Every time Liam looked at me, his face was back to normal, the charming, smiling fiancé. But I knew what was behind the mask now. I knew what he really saw when he looked at me. After the last guest had left, I was standing at the sink, my hands in the hot, soapy water, my body trembling. The apartment was silent. "That was a great night," Liam said, coming up behind me. He wrapped his arms around my waist, his hands resting on my stomach. The same gesture that had once made me feel cherished now felt like a violation, like he was measuring my failure. "Everyone was so impressed," he continued, his voice a happy, oblivious hum in my ear. "You were perfect." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, my knuckles white on the edge of the sink. "You see?" he said, kissing the top of my head. "I told you we could do it. All that hard work paid off. You're almost there, Ava. You're almost perfect." And that's when I broke. The image of his disgusted face flashed in my mind, and a wounded guttural sob, escaped my lips. He stiffened. "What? What's wrong?" He sounded annoyed, his perfect evening being spoiled by my sudden inconvenient emotion. I turned to face him, my face wet with tears. I hadn't even realized I was crying. "I saw you," I whispered, my voice raw. "I saw the way you looked at me when I was eating." His face went blank. Then, a flicker of something ugly and defensive crossed his features. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," I said, my voice getting stronger, fueled by the rising tide of a year's worth of repressed pain. "You looked at me like I was something you'd scrape off the bottom of your shoe." He let out a short, sharp, humorless laugh. He let go of me and took a step back, the mask of the supportive fiancé finally completely falling away. What was left was a stranger, a cruel, resentful man whose patience had finally run out. "Oh my gosh, Ava, don't be so dramatic," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "You want to know what I was thinking? Fine, I'll tell you. I was thinking that I worked my ass off to create this perfect evening. I brought my boss, my colleagues into our home. And you, after playing the part of the disciplined little dieter all night, you couldn't wait 2 seconds for everyone to leave before you started stuffing your face like a goddamn farm animal." The words hit me, one after another like punches. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth. "I am so tired of this, Ava," he continued, his voice rising, his face twisting into the same ugly sneer I had seen earlier. "I am so tired of managing you, of managing your appetite. I am trying to build a life, a real life, and you are a liability. I can't bring you to client dinners without worrying that you're going to embarrass me. I can't look at my friends' wives without feeling this pit of shame in my stomach." He was pacing now, a caged animal, all his pent-up resentment pouring out in a torrent of poison. "I thought you could change. I really did. I thought our wedding, our future, would be enough motivation. But you just can't help yourself, can you? It's always there. That hunger." He stopped and looked at me, his eyes cold and dead, and then he said the single, irrevocable, soul-destroying word. "It's disgusting," he said, his voice dropping to a low, final whisper. "Your appetite. The way you look at food. The way you eat. The way you are. It's just disgusting. Disgusting." The word hung in the air between us, a foul, ugly thing. It was a nuclear bomb that vaporized everything I had ever believed about us, about myself. It was a verdict from which there was no appeal. I stared at him, my mind a white-hot blank of pure, unadulterated pain. The magician was dead. The good, sweet girlfriend was dead. The hopeful bride was dead. They had all been murdered in this kitchen by that one single word. All I could see was the plate of black bean brownies still sitting on the counter. The sad, pathetic symbol of my desperate attempt to please him. With a guttural scream of pure animal rage, I grabbed the platter and hurled it against the wall. It shattered with a deafening crash, the brown, pasty mess sliding down the pristine white paint in a hideous, ugly smear. Liam just stared at me, his face a mask of shock and revulsion. I was no longer his project to be managed. I was a monster that had just broken out of its cage. The sound of the shattering platter echoed in the sudden ringing silence of our kitchen. The ugly brown smear of black bean brownies on the white wall was a perfect visual metaphor for my life. A pathetic, healthy-ish lie, now exposed as a disgusting mess. Liam stared at me, his face a mask of shock and horror. He wasn't seeing his fiancé anymore. He was seeing a crazy person, a wild animal that had just broken its leash. And in a way he was right. The sweet, compliant, people-pleasing Ava he had so carefully tried to mold had just died a violent death on that kitchen floor. I didn't scream at him. I didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It had gone nuclear, transmuting into a white-hot, silent rage that burned away every last shred of love I had for him. I looked at him, this stranger with the disgusted sneer on his face, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. "Get out," I whispered. My voice was a low, guttural rasp that I didn't recognize. "Eva, this is my apartment too," he started, trying to regain control, to reassert his authority. "Get out!" I roared, the sound ripping from my throat with the force of 1,000 repressed meals, 1,000 unspoken resentments. I picked up a heavy copper-bottomed pot from the stove, my pot, and I held it like a weapon. "Get out of my kitchen. Get out of my home. Get out of my life. Now!" He saw the look in my eyes. The wild, untamed, utterly broken look of a woman with absolutely nothing left to lose. And for the first time, I saw fear in his. He stumbled backward, grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door, and left, slamming the door behind him. And then I was alone. Alone, the wreckage of my perfect life. I slid down the kitchen wall, my back against the brownie-smeared paint, and I sat there, on the cold, hard floor, all night. I didn't move. I just stared into the darkness, the word disgusting replaying in my mind like a skipping record, each repetition a fresh stab to my soul. That night on the kitchen floor was my rock bottom. But it was also my awakening. As the sun began to stream through the window, illuminating the mess and the debris, a strange cold clarity settled over me. Liam hadn't just insulted my body. He had insulted my soul. My passion for food, for creation, for nurturing, the very essence of who I was what he found disgusting. He hadn't fallen in love with me. He had fallen in love with the idea of a project, a fixer-upper he could mold into the perfect accessory for his perfect life. And I had let him. I had willingly participated in my own self-annihilation. No more. No more. The thought was a silent, ironclad vow. I wasn't going to let his ugly, narrow definition of me be my epitaph. I was going to reclaim the very thing he had tried to shame me for. My love for food was not my weakness. It was my superpower. And I was going to turn it into a weapon. My war, my counterattack, began that morning with a single act of defiance. I walked to the farmer's market. I hadn't been in months. The familiar sights and smells, the earthy scent of fresh soil, the vibrant colors of the produce, the loud, happy chatter of the crowd, it felt like coming home. I walked through the stalls, not as a woman on a diet, but as a chef reacquainting herself with her palate. And then I saw him. Chef Antoine, standing behind his stall, his grumpy face a welcome, familiar landmark. I walked up, my heart pounding. I was sure he wouldn't remember me. He looked up from polishing a batch of heirloom tomatoes, and his piercing blue eyes narrowed. "The girl with the good palate," he grunted. "Where have you been? You look like hell." His blunt, unsentimental assessment was the kindest thing anyone could have said to me. It was real. It was honest. Tears sprang to my eyes. "I got lost for a while, chef," I whispered. He just grunted again, but there was a flicker of something like understanding in his eyes. "Well, don't just stand there crying," he said, gesturing to his vegetables. "The food won't cook itself." That was the beginning of my new life. The next few weeks were a brutal, logistical whirlwind. I broke the engagement. I packed up Liam's things and left them with his doorman. I endured the tearful, confused phone calls from my family, the pitying texts from our mutual friends. I ignored them all. I was a soldier on a mission, and I had no time for collateral damage. I broke the lease on our apartment, paid the penalty with my savings, and found a tiny, cheap studio apartment above a noisy bakery. It was a shoebox, but it was mine, and it always smelled of baking bread. I quit my marketing job. I walked in, gave my 2 weeks' notice, and ignored the shocked, gossiping stares of my colleague. My old life was being systematically dismantled. I was burning the bridges and salting the earth behind me. My battle plan had one single, audacious, terrifying objective. I was going to become a professional chef. This was not a gentle, follow-your-passion journey. This was a brutal, all-consuming war. I took every penny of my savings, the money I had set aside for my wedding, my future, and I enrolled in a grueling 6-month intensive program at the best culinary school in the city. Culinary school is not a foodie's dream. It's boot camp. It's 16-hour days on your feet. It's the constant pressure of the clock. It's the sting of hot oil on your skin, the sharp bite of a carelessly wielded knife, the screaming of a head chef who is pushing you to your absolute limit. It is a world of pain, of sweat, of heat, and of unrelenting pressure. And I thrived in it. The other students were mostly young, cocky men who looked at me. A slightly older, soft-bodied woman with dismissive smirks. They thought I wouldn't last a week, but they didn't know what I knew. They were there to build a career. I was there to rebuild a soul. They didn't have the fire I had, the fire of a woman who had been called disgusting. That fire could fuel a blast furnace. I channeled every ounce of my rage and heartbreak into my knives. My knife skills, sloppy at first, became precise and lightning fast. The memory of Liam's disgusted face fueled every whisk, every sauté, every perfectly rendered sauce. The physical pain of the kitchen, the burns on my forearms, the aching in my back, the cuts on my fingers, was a welcome distraction from the pain in my heart. It was a tangible, clean pain, a pain that came from creation, not from destruction. I was being broken down and remade, not by a man's judgment, but by the discipline of my chosen craft. Chef Antoine became my unwitting mentor, du Sardin. I would go to him at the market on my one day off, my hands raw, my eyes burning with exhaustion, and I would show him what I was learning. I'd bring him a small taste of a sauce I was working on, a pâté I had just mastered. He would taste it, his face grim, and offer a single brutal corrective comment. "Too much salt. Your mirepoix is lazy. You did not respect the Maillard reaction." His critiques were merciless, but they were honest. And every once in a while, he would give me that rare, precious nod. "Not bad, girl. Not bad." The struggles were immense. I was broke. I was living on cheap ramen and the family meal we were fed at school. I was lonely. I had cut myself off from my old life, and I had no time to build a new one. There were nights I would come home to my tiny, lonely apartment, my body aching so badly I could barely climb the stairs, and I would collapse into bed and cry from sheer exhaustion and despair. The ghosts of Liam's words would come back to haunt me. "You're a liability. You're disgusting. You can't help yourself." But then morning would come. The smell of baking bread would drift up from the bakery downstairs, and I would get up, put on my chef's whites, sharpen my knives, and go back to the war. I was a fighter now, and fighters don't quit. I graduated at the top of my class. The cocky young men who had dismissed me now looked at me with a grudging, fearful respect. I had outworked them, outcooked them, and outlasted them. I had found my power. But the real war was just beginning. Graduating was easy. Getting a job in the cutthroat, male-dominated world of high-end kitchens was another story. I was still a plus-size woman, and I was older than most of the line cooks I was competing against. I faced rejection after rejection. "You don't have the stamina," one chef told me, his eyes flicking over my body. "This is a young man's game." So I took a job as a line cook at a gritty, no-name bistro. The kind of place that would hire anyone willing to work 80 hours a week for minimum wage. And I worked. I put my head down, and I cooked. I was faster, cleaner, and more consistent than anyone else on the line. I learned how to move in the chaotic ballet of a busy service, how to command my station, how to be a quiet, indispensable professional. For 2 years I climbed. I moved from the bistro to a better restaurant, then a better one. I absorbed every technique, every flavor profile, every lesson. I was a sponge, a machine, a woman possessed. My body changed, not because I was dieting, but because of the sheer physical demands of my profession. I was still a big woman, but the softness was replaced by the hard, dense muscle of a warrior. And then I saw an opportunity. A small, beloved neighborhood restaurant, owned by an elderly couple, went up for sale. It had a great location, but a tired menu. It was a fixer-upper, a project. And this time, I was going to be the one in charge. I took the biggest risk of my life. I drained my savings. I took out a small business loan. I begged my parents for a loan, showing them a business plan so meticulous, so well-researched that they couldn't say no. And I bought it. I bought my own kitchen, my own restaurant, my own future. I spent the next 6 months in a state of controlled chaos, renovating, designing anew, hiring a small, loyal staff. The restaurant was my canvas. I painted it with my story. The menu was a celebration of everything Liam had tried to shame me for. It was rich, it was joyful, it was unapologetically delicious. It was a love letter to food. We opened on a Tuesday, 2 years to the day after Liam had called me disgusting. I named the restaurant The Phoenix, and I had no idea if anyone would come. The first few months after opening The Phoenix were the hardest, most terrifying, and most exhilarating of my life. I was living on caffeine, adrenaline, and the sheer desperate force of my own will. I was the first one in the kitchen every morning, and the last one to leave every night, scrubbing the floors on my hands and knees long after my small staff had gone home. There was no room for error, no budget for failure. Every dish that left my kitchen, every plate that was set in front of a customer, was a piece of my own resurrected soul. Slowly, word began to spread. At first it was just the neighborhood locals, drawn in by the warm, inviting glow and the incredible smells wafting from the kitchen. Then came the food bloggers, their Instagram posts filled with pictures of my signature dish. A slow-braised short rib so tender it fell apart with a fork, served with a creamy Parmesan polenta. The dish was a direct, defiant middle finger to the joyless, low-fat world Liam had tried to force upon me. It was rich, it was comforting, it was a celebration of flavor. The first big turning point came about 6 months after we opened. A notoriously harsh, influential food critic from the city's biggest newspaper came in, unannounced, on a busy Friday night. I didn't even know she was there until after the service was over. I spent the next week in an agony of suspense, my stomach in knots, expecting to be torn to shreds. The following Friday, my sous chef ran into the kitchen, his face pale, holding a copy of the newspaper. "Chef," he breathed, "you need to see this." I took the paper with trembling hands, and there it was, a full-page rave review. The headline read, "The Phoenix Rises. A star is born in the city's most soulful new kitchen." The critic didn't just praise the food, she praised the heart behind it. She wrote, "Chef Ava doesn't just cook food. She tells a story of joy, of abundance, of a deep and profound love for her craft." To eat at the Phoenix is to be reminded that the most satisfying meals are not about trends or techniques, but about pure, unadulterated pleasure. I read the review standing in the middle of my kitchen, surrounded by the morning prep, and I began to cry. Not tears of sadness or rage, but tears of pure, overwhelming gratitude. I had done it. My voice, the voice Liam had tried to convince me was disgusting, was finally being heard, and people were calling it beautiful. After that review, everything changed. The floodgates opened. We were booked out solid for 3 months in advance. We were featured in national magazines. We were nominated for Best New Restaurant at the city's annual culinary awards. I was no longer just a chef. I was a success story. I had built my own world, a world where my passion was not a liability, but my greatest asset. I was living my dream, a dream so much bigger and more real than the small domestic one I had once planned with Liam. I hadn't seen or heard from him in 2 years. He was a ghost, a bad memory from another lifetime. I assumed he had married his thin, appropriate fiancé and was living his perfect, polished life in the suburb. I had long since stopped caring. And then he walked into my restaurant. It was a Tuesday night, about 1.5 years after we opened. I was on the pass, expediting orders in the controlled chaos of the dinner rush. The dining room was a warm, happy buzz of conversation and clinking glasses. "Chef, table 7, 2 tops, just sat down," my hostess said through the comms system. I glanced at the monitor that showed the live feed of the dining room, and my heart stopped. It was him. It was Liam. He was sitting at one of my best tables, a small, intimate two-top by the window. He was with a woman, a painfully thin, severe-looking blonde, who was scrolling through her phone, looking bored. He looked different. The golden boy charm had faded, replaced by a strained, tired look around the eyes. He had lost weight, but it didn't look healthy. It looked gone. He looked unhappy. For a moment, I was paralyzed. The 15-year-old girl in me, the one who was still afraid of bullies, wanted to run and hide in the walk-in freezer. But then the head chef, the business owner, the warrior, took over. This was my kitchen. This was my dining room. He was not a monster in my nightmare. He was a customer in my restaurant. A customer who was about to eat a meal that would be the final closing statement in our dead story. A cold, calm resolve settled over me. "Listen up, kitchen," I called out, my voice sharp and clear. Table 7, 2 tops, VIPs. I want every single dish that goes out to that table to be absolutely flawlessly perfect. I will be plating this one myself." My team, sensing the sudden intensity, just nodded. "Yes, chef." And so I cooked for him, one last time. But this meal wasn't a desperate plea for his approval. It was a declaration of my independence. It was a story of my resurrection, told in 3 courses. For his appetizer, I sent out my famous seared scallops with a parsnip puree and a brown butter vinaigrette. Rich, decadent, and unapologetically full of fat and flavor. For his main course, I sent him my signature braised short rib, the dish that had put me on the map, a monument to the slow, patient, and joyful art of cooking. And for dessert, I sent out a molten chocolate lava cake, a dish so rich, so gooey, so utterly indulgent, that it was the physical embodiment of everything he had tried to shame me for. I watched him on the monitor. I watched as the first bite of the scallops went into his mouth. I saw his eyes close for a fraction of a second. I saw the surprise, the pleasure. I watched as he and his date fell silent, consumed by the food. They weren't talking. They were eating. And I knew, in that moment, that I had him. After they had paid the bill, I did something I hadn't planned on. I took off my apron, wiped my hands on a clean towel, and I walked out of my kitchen. I walked through the buzzing dining room, past the tables of happy, satisfied customers, and I walked right up to their table. "Good evening," I said, my voice calm and even. "I'm Chef Ava. I hope you enjoyed your meal." Liam looked up, and the color drained from his face. His eyes went wide with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked from my face to the name Ava embroidered on my chef's whites, and back to my face. The recognition, the confusion, and the dawning, sickening horror crashed over him all at once. "Ava?" he whispered, his voice a strangled croak. "Oh my God, this is your restaurant?" The blonde woman looked from him to me, her expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "Liam, what's going on? Do you know her?" "Yes," I answered for him, my eyes locked on Liam's. I gave him a small, polite smile. "We used to be engaged." The woman's jaw dropped. Liam looked like he had been struck by lightning. He just sat there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish, unable to form words. "I just wanted to thank you for coming in," I continued, my voice smooth as silk. "I was a little surprised to see your name on the reservation list. I trust everything was to your satisfaction. Not too disgusting, I hope." I let the word hang in the air between us, a beautiful, perfect, poisoned dart. I saw the memory of that night, of his sneer, of his cruelty, flash in his eyes. I saw the shame, hot and red, creep up his neck. I, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room, as if looking for an escape route. "I had no idea. You look happy?" I offered, my smile widening. "Successful, like a woman who is not a liability, but the sole proprietor of a thriving business." He just stared at me, speechless. The golden boy was gone. All that was left was a pale, weak man, utterly out of his depth, being confronted by the ghost he thought he had destroyed. I looked at the thin, bored woman sitting next to him, and I didn't feel jealousy. I felt pity. She had gotten the prize. She had gotten the thin, perfect man who would one day turn his disgust on her, if he hadn't already. "That night, 2 years ago, you told me my hunger was disgusting. And for a long time, I believed you. But I've come to realize that my hunger is the best part of me. It's what built this entire place. And the saddest thing is, you're starving. You're just too empty to even know it." And with that, I stood up straight. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said, my voice returning to its professional, polite tone. I gave his date a brief, commiserating nod, and then I turned and walked back to my kitchen, back to my kingdom, without a single backward glance. The victory was so much sweeter than I had ever imagined. It wasn't about his shock or his shame. It was about me. It was about standing in my own power, in the world that I had built, and looking my tormentor in the eye, not as a victim, but as the master of my own universe. Being fat is not a sin. Having a healthy, joyful appetite for life and all its delicious pleasures is not a sin. The real sin, the real ugliness, is trying to starve someone else's soul to feed your own fragile ego. It's trying to shrink someone's world to make yours feel bigger. To anyone watching this, to anyone who has ever been made to feel ashamed of their hunger, for food, for success, for love, for life, I need you to hear me. Your appetite is not your weakness. It is your power. It is your fuel. Don't ever let anyone convince you to starve. Instead, learn to cook. Learn to build your own feast. And then, When the time is right, you can invite them to your table and show them just how much they're missing. The next morning, the voicemail started. The first was from him, a long, rambling, pathetic apology filled with excuses and pleas for a chance to talk. I deleted it without listening to the end. My life is a tasting menu now, and I have no room for bitter leftovers. The voicemails continued for about a week. Each one was more desperate than the last. I heard through the grapevine that his engagement to the blonde woman had ended shortly after their dinner at my restaurant. Apparently, the story of our past was not something his fiancé found particularly charming. His life, it seemed, was a series of bad investments. I never responded to any of his messages. I just changed my number. My past was no longer my problem to solve. My life now is rich and full in a way I never could have imagined 2 years ago. The Phoenix is thriving. We earned our first major award last spring, and I'm already in the process of scouting a location for a second restaurant, a small, intimate pasta bar dedicated to the recipes my grandmother taught me. I'm building an empire, one delicious plate at a time. I even see Chef Antoine regularly. He comes into the restaurant for dinner once a month, sits at the bar, and orders the exact same thing every time. He never says a word to me until the end of the meal. Then he'll flag me down, look me dead in the eye, and offer a single gruff comment. The polenta was a little loose tonight, or perfect seasoning on the scallop. It's the highest praise I could ever ask for. He still sees my palate, not my size. And love? I've learned that the most important love story is the one you have with yourself. I've learned that you have to feed your own soul before you can ever truly share a table with someone else. I'm not looking for a partner to complete me, but I am open to finding someone who wants to share the feast. Sharing this story with you, the ugly parts, the painful parts, that disgusting word. It's a strange thing. For so long, it was my secret shame, a wound that I thought would never heal. But speaking it out loud, here in this space, with this incredible community, it robs the word of its power. You all have helped me take the ugliest ingredient of my life and transform it into something nourishing. Your support, your presence, is the secret ingredient that makes all of this possible. And that's why I need you to add your voice to our table. If this story of reclaiming your hunger resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to hit that notification bell, because our menu is always changing, and I don't want you to miss a single course. Every subscription is another guest at our table, making our feast bigger and better. Now, I want to hear from you. This is the most important part of the meal. I want you to go to the comments and tell me about the passion that someone else tried to make you feel ashamed of. Was it your love for art, for books, for your own quiet solitude? Share the story of how you reclaimed your disgusting passion and turned it into your superpower. I will be reading every single one. Your stories are the recipes that give strength and inspiration to everyone else sitting at this table. Thank you for being here, for letting me share my story. Remember to always, always honor your own appetite. Feed your passions, feed your dreams, and feed your soul. Don't ever let anyone make you feel ashamed for being hungry for a beautiful life. Love you all, your Ava. See you in the next story.